Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast again, Knowledge Hub with Geopolitical. And the last English podcast we did got about 15,000 views, I guess, and it's growing, which I didn't expect from our audience, which is really good. Kudos to you guys. Try to understand what we were saying, and few people have actually commented that even though they couldn't understand English very much, the accent of our guest speaker kind of helped them to understand better. So that's promising and that's encouraging. So he's here again. Hi, Nilanthan.
Hi, good to be back. So for once my accent was useful, so I'm happy about that. Thank you to you and to your audience. So yeah, very impressed with how knowledgeable your audience is.
Okay, cool. So yesterday was a big day for Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And we had an earlier telephone conversation. I believe it's the day before, right? Day before we had a conversation of what's happening. Is there another ship coming? Is it for real? And what's going to happen to us? So we, as a country, we have handled it in a certain way.
Yes.
Our president addressed the nation. What do you think of the overall situation? Is it positive for Sri Lanka? Is it a good strategic move?
So I think it's the best possible move we could have taken in a very bad situation. So if I remember when we spoke on the phone last, our government had not taken a position on it yet.
Yeah.
And we were kind of wondering which side they would take. So obviously nobody wants to get dragged into this war. We, for whatever reason, have gotten dragged into it. And look, this idea that we will be neutral but humanitarian, I personally can't think of a better way to have handled a problem like this.
Just to interrupt you there, if you heard what's happening on the skies above, I don't know whether this is something that I'm going to say that's going to have a security implication, but 2 hours ago, I never saw that before. I saw a Sri Lankan Airbus A320 going towards Ratmalana airport. That never happens, right? So it's a military airport. A passenger airliner is going to land in there. Is it an emergency, or are they going to transport someone out of the country? So
No, I have a feeling that it's the latter. Of course, we don't have any conclusive evidence for things like this. But
now jets are flying above.
Yeah, I think it's quite normal in situations like this for there to be some logistical movement around. You never know who needs to be, even out of the Iranians that we have here at the moment, who's in critical condition, who's not, who might be a little more wanted over the others. So I think it's better to be logistically prepared, and all of these noises, even my guess, I don't have any conclusive proof for it, but even my guess would be that it's us preparing for different eventualities, which is a good thing.
Okay, going back to the discussion.
Going back to discussion. So, I mean, I can't think of a better way that this could have been handled. Obviously, the United States, as a strategist, it's my job to point out that the United States is a far more valuable strategic ally given our own economic and diplomatic and political situation.
They buy more stuff from us than Iran.
Much more stuff than us, wield a lot more geopolitical clout than us, can do a lot more for us, blah, blah, blah. But with all that being said, it's also important for us to acknowledge that we as a country have certain moral duties. Now, as you know, I'm not a big fan of international law and obligations and all that, but there's nothing wrong with some basic level of morality and ethics and decency. We got a distress call in international waters and we responded to it. And as long as we are not directly infringing on our own national security under the mask of morality, I've always been fine with us picking ethical, moral choices. So here, I think it was a good balance. We haven't really blundered by saying anything that we shouldn't have. And we've also kind of put up a humanitarian neutral face. So I think if you and I were the president, even if we had a magic wand, we couldn't have handled it in any other way. This was a very common sense way of handling
that is very encouraging. So do you think that our government has contacted both parties who are warring against each other and then kind of told them that this is what we are going to do and do not attack us?
See, I think with Iran, there would have been certain conversations because the Iranian government would have made official requests. To be completely honest with you, I've been following the American media very closely for the last 2 or 3 days. Hardly any American even knows about this conundrum that Sri Lanka is facing. They heard about the first ship that was taken out in international waters, but you have nobody in the American media being like, oh, do you know there's another ship which has taken refuge in Sri Lanka? Should we move against Sri Lanka? No. There's absolutely zero We, rightfully so, have been focused on this. As a country, we should be. But outside of this region, you have very, very almost nobody speaking about this. In the region, in India, Pakistan, places like that, you do have these strategic discussions, but the Americans don't really care right now. See, you've got to remember that the Americans still want to call this a military operation, and if they start going too deeper into the narrative of war, and if they start saying, oh, you are now harboring prisoners of war and all that, then Trump has to go get a congressional approval and all that, which they don't want. So,
but the thing is, they can wage war without actually calling it war, by calling it a military operation, but use the same funds, the same weapons, the same army.
exactly. So it's the
So what's the point of having a Congress?
So that's the criticism against Trump, and that's why Congress is now trying to restrict the president's war powers.
Can
Because
they?
They're trying to. If they get a vote, they can. They lost the force vote. Now,
So that means still the majority is on Trump's side.
yeah, the majority will always be on the pro-war side. I mean, this is American politics. In fact, Trump is the first one to break that, because the Democrats and the Republicans were essentially the same party with a few economic, social policy differences. But if an alien came from outer space, to them, they would both look like the same party with just a few cosmetic differences, right?
That's a good one.
But it's essentially a pro-war, pro-industry. That's how it's always been. And it's only in the
So people like Bernie Sanders are the exception.
very, very deep exceptions. So now, of course, now there are many wannabe Bernie Sanders-like figures, because now it's very fashionable, if you're a young politician on the Democrat side, to be a firebrand. Now, Sanders, even though I don't agree with most of his politics, you've got to respect him for the fact that he was doing it back when it required actual courage to have his position. You actually will lose politically. Most of these modern leftists in American politics, like
AOC.
Ilhan Omar, AOC and all that, they have a lot to gain by being leftist firebrands. Whereas Bernie Sanders had to destroy his own political career for his ideas. So there's a big difference. But what I mean is that until very recently, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party were the same party with very, very few differences. And that pro-war lobby will always be there, and they will always support efforts like this. So
47 to 53 split is actually going in the other way. Like it was previously, it was a bigger gap, you mean? Now
yeah,
the gap is closing.
it would have been something like 90% voting for war. Whereas, so if you remember, if you look at American politics, it was typically the Libertarian Party like Ron Paul and all that, who were actually anti-war and anti-military industrial complex. Whereas both the Republicans and the Democrats were essentially representatives of those interests in many ways. So yeah, this does show a shift in, but my point is that if the Americans wanted to make a big deal out of what we were doing, they would have to formalize the war a lot more than that. Whereas now they're just following the Putin playbook. You call it a special military operation, and no matter how many years it goes on, you keep calling it a special military operation. Now, if China decides to invade Taiwan a few years from now, a few months from now, whatever, they wouldn't call it a war either. They would call it a special military operation as well. That's like the current trend in warfare.
Okay. So going back to the international waters scenario.
Yeah.
So we call the sea has different zones.
Yes.
And now even Americans have said that we have attacked the ship in international waters.
Yes.
But there's a special economic zone, there's a sovereign sea strip.
Yes.
So tell us more about that.
So typically, within 12 nautical miles is your territorial waters under the UN Law of the Sea
Nautical
Convention.
miles is how much? In
A little
kilometers?
more than a regular mile. So yeah, you need
1.8 kilometers.
Yeah, something like that, right? So it's a little more than a regular mile, if I'm not mistaken. So we are a party to the UN Law of the Sea Convention. We call it UNCLOS. In fact, I can't remember his name. I think it was Dr. Hiran Jayawardena, who was one of the lead negotiators on Sri Lankan side. Very celebrated for getting Sri Lanka a lot out of those international law negotiations. So 12 nautical miles is your territorial waters. Now that's as good as your land territory. Undisputed, that's your territory.
You need a visa.
Yeah, you need the host country's approval in some way. Then you have things like the exclusive economic zone. Now you have people have this term sovereign zone and continental shelf and all that, which keeps going. Here, it's a bit of a, so for your exclusive economic zone, you do technically need the host country's permission for economic activities. If I was going to go there to do drilling, mining, and things
Fishing?
like that. Fishing, beyond a certain extent, you do need the host country's permission. If it turns into a proper economic activity. So where the
You mean like recreational fishing is okay through a yacht or something?
yeah, as in, I can't imagine a country spending the money to take somebody to an international court simply for yachting or fishing personally. Because remember, a country has to take action against you in order for that law to mean something. So countries will take action if you're engaged in proper economic, systematic, formalized economic activities without their permission. So now, we, thankfully, did not pull ourselves into this big mess by saying, oh no, that was our exclusive economic zone, that was not international waters.
In fact, it was our exclusive economic zone, right?
I mean, I am assuming we'll know the coordinates pretty soon. We don't know what the exact, chronology, where did the distress signal come from, where was it taken. We'll know those details soon.
So we know in the sense, will the media know, and through the media you will know, or you will know beforehand?
I mean, I'll probably know beforehand, but it won't be information that's so sensitive that you need to be at the higher echelons of power and all that. It would just be people confiding in me or whatever, and then based on whether that's critical information for national security or not, then people like me have to take a call on whether we want to be open with it. But trust me, you will find out through many different media sources. Our problem is too much information, not too little. Our problem is that you're going to have 25 different experts giving you 25 different versions rather than not knowing anything about it. So we will know, but I feel personally that it's a good thing that we did not legally challenge it. That would have been us taking a position. That would have been us getting dragged into a war like this. Right now,
but the opposition is calling out for that, calling out the government for that.
But that's the opposition's job, right? Any opposition's job is to call out a government for doing certain things, even if those things were things that they would have done when they were in power. This is how electoral politics works. When you're in power, you sing a different tune. When you're out of power, you sing a different tune. And no political party in this country is immune to this trend, as you know.
Even the current government did the same.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, and this is a part and parcel of politics. There's no point in being surprised by it. It's just, if you want to live in an electoral democracy, particularly in a developing country, then these are the things that you need to tolerate, because the only alternative would be a monarchy or dictatorship or whatever, and that will come with its own pros and cons. So
okay, just to follow up on that point.
Yeah.
So if we are a developed country with a lot of people having a better civic sense and a civic understanding, and the democracy is actually implemented in the way it's supposed to be, then what would be the opposition's response to an event like this?
The opposition's response would be something along the lines of, okay, is this in our strategic interest? And therefore, is this something that we should have done? At least the opposition parties would have some kind of data-driven complaints of, this is what we did when we were in power, and therefore we are against what these guys are doing now that they are in power. Whereas what you see in our part of the world is opposition parties complain simply because they can, and they often complain about things that they did when they were in power. So that's what
hypocrisy.
I mean. Yeah, that's the hypocrisy of democracy.
That's a good term. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but once again, I mean, remember, we are all societies historically who have not been democracies. We've all historically been monarchies. And the democratic system itself is something that was imposed on us through colonialism. And then what do we do in Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and all that? We go back to our monarchy roots. You vote for the grandfather, you vote for the father, you vote for the son.
Only this time is different.
Yeah, I mean, only this time is different, but who knows when it's going to revert, right? Public memory is very raw in terms of these things. But if you look at South Asia in general, even our elected politicians have been grandfathers and grandsons and mothers and daughters, which shows just how the sense of monarchy is really drilled into our blood, so to speak. So these are the things that you need to tolerate, and I personally do not find the opposition's complaints to be very strategic, to be honest. There's a big debate at the moment over whether we should put out a statement over the fact that a ship was taken out like this right off our coast and all that. Now, I would be in favor of that if the Sri Lankan Navy was in favor of that. So, I personally feel that it's the Sri Lankan Navy should take a call on whether they want to put out a statement or not. Because some people say, oh, the country's reputation is at stake. Whereas I would say the country's reputation is not at stake. The Sri Lankan Navy's reputation is at stake. Our country's reputation is already that we are a bankrupt nation. Now, the fact that we are not putting out harsh statements against Washington and all that, that's not going to do anything for our reputation this way or that way. But to the Sri Lankan Navy, I think it is an important thing. So if they want to make a statement on it, they can. A lot of people...
Why should they want to do it? I mean, why would they?
So, I mean, currently there are many retired admirals, rear admirals, so on, who are pushing for this, who say that it's their credibility at stake, that nobody...
Why do you think it's a credibility at stake? Because the US submarines have the best stealth technology in the world. There are nowhere in the world that we can detect such a thing. And we don't have the technology to even block it or attack it back or whatever. So we are at a very disadvantageous position. So people would understand, the world would understand that Sri Lanka cannot go retaliate against the US attack.
Yeah, the world doesn't care.
Yeah.
The world doesn't care whether we put out a statement or not.
So the reputation is at stake when somebody is looking at you, no?
Yeah, but the perspective of many security experts right now, not mine, of many security experts right now, is that our reputation is at stake, our credibility is at stake, and that we need to at least put out a statement condemning this.
Maybe they personally feel some inferiority within them.
I mean, I don't know. Look, many of them are my colleagues and my friends and all that.
Yeah, you can't say that. I can say.
Yeah, you can say it, obviously, and I can wink. Right. But my point is that in a situation like this, often pride, emotions, all of that come to the fore. You can't really stop it. And as long as it's a neutral message, I don't see anything wrong with it. See, the problem is a lot of people here say that the Indian Ocean is a zone of peace. So in the 70s and 80s, when we were very diplomatically influential, we really pushed this idea of the Indian Ocean being a zone of peace.
We were influential at that time.
Yeah, we were respected. When Srima Bandaranaike, for example, was at there, I mean, at least we had some vision, we had some long-term planning.
Non-alignment.
Yeah, but the problem with non-alignment is that we
I
were
know
never...
you hate it.
Yeah, and my problem is not that I hate it. My problem is that we've never really followed it. When one party is in power, we went with a certain faction. When the next party came to power, we went with another faction. So I don't see how we can call what we've been doing non-alignment in any meaningful way. You know, it's kind of like playing musical chairs where you keep jumping from seat to seat and then saying, oh, I was meditating, I was doing yoga.
Now you can't go back and say that again, and we have lost the respect out of it.
Yeah, we've lost the credibility, which is the point. Most countries now know what our game is. So, but anyway, many experts here feel that this is some kind of zone of peace which we created, and that this is some kind of big insult to this zone of peace concept, and that we now need to put out a statement.
We had a war like 10, 12 years ago. 16 years ago.
Yeah.
So in that war, we fought in the sea.
Yeah, we fought in the sea, and we pioneered many of the naval tactics that you see all over the world today. I mean,
Like what?
Okay, like how to counter suicide vessels. You know, the suicide drones that you see now? The LTTE were the pioneers of that. And
you mean the boat type?
You know, just using a non-living object as a suicidal craft to crash into your critical infrastructure. What Iran is doing now, a lot of this was pioneered by the LTTE, and the way to counter that was pioneered by the Sri Lankan Navy.
So how can you say that world learned it from us? Was it documented and discussed?
Yeah, very, very deeply documented.
All around the world?
Yes.
In these defense events and all that?
Yes. In fact, very, very few international defense or military experts will deny that the LTT was one of the first non-state actors to use sea drones and aerial drones. And very few of them will deny that we conclusively defeated the LTT militarily. So this is something acknowledged all over the world in proper professional military circles. where
Good
they
thing
know
that
what
aerial drones were not that popular back in the day, no? Otherwise, we would have been landing.
Yeah,
so
I mean, we would have come up with some kind of counter for it, obviously. But yeah, so the LTT pioneered a lot of these low cost, high efficiency methods of attacking.
IEDs.
Yeah, IEDs. I mean, yeah. So from IEDs to drones, there was a lot of innovation from the LTT side, and you saw a lot of counter innovation from our side. So we are one of the first air forces in the world to use drones in surveillance, combat. So
Really?
yeah. In fact, I think I told you one of the one who's in charge of port security at the Colombo port at the moment, Dilshan Vasage, a former student of mine. Former Air Commodore and things like that. He was in charge of many of the drone operations and all that against the LTT.
I remember a drone called Kelama.
Okay. So I don't remember the exact things, but to track their movements, to see what was going on, we were one of the first.
After US, obviously.
But even the US was using these big bombing drones. If you remember,
Reapers.
Reapers and all that. But this is what we see now. Smaller drones where the calculations are based more on impact than budget and glamour and things like that. Whereas the Reaper drones, the Predator drones were a lot more about showcasing the next generation of warfare technology. Rather than low impact things like this. Ironically, now nobody cares about the Predator drones and the Reaper drones and all that, right? Now everybody cares about a drone that you can buy for $200 and attach a stick of dynamite to it and crash it into a hospital or an energy.
That Iranian drone, which had about the one they are using, it has a range of 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small drone.
Yeah.
And I think the warhead is also quite big.
Yeah. So the warhead you can change.
Yeah.
You can put different payloads on it. But yeah, so because over the last 4 or 5 years.
It has a piston engine to make sure that it runs reliably and economically in a low speed setting.
Yeah, to the point where even the Russians are purchasing it. It's not just some thing that is just the Iranians are using.
Turkey also did the same, no?
Yeah,
Turkey.
So Turkey has a slightly more industrial drone infrastructure. So the Iranian drone industry is still not as big as the Turkish drone. The Turks have really kind of pumped in huge amounts of money into being a drone superpower. I wouldn't call Iran a drone superpower, but Iran is certainly a mass manufacturer of drones to Russia in particular, and they can use all this. So anyway, for me to circle back to this, there are many people here who feel that the regional countries are keeping too quiet about this. So if you look at the Indian security community, a lot of them are like, oh my God, why is Modi not making a statement? If you look at our own security community, many people feel that we should be making a strong statement.
If India's not doing it, why should we?
Yeah, so the argument is, well, forget about what India wants to do and what it doesn't want to do. Are we as a navy and as a country willing to put out a statement or not? And I think that's fair. I think it's fair for people to say that. So I don't think we will lose anything simply by saying we regret or we are concerned by what happened.
Instead of saying we condemn.
Borders. Yeah.
You can't
go into value. If you go into value statements like that, that will become a huge disaster, unfortunately. But then you could also make an argument of, if you're just going to make a baseless, diluted, meaningless non-statement, then why make the statement in the first place, right? So if you look at India, for instance, now, India can't really, a lot of people say, oh, shouldn't India condemn that, right? India can't really condemn it because India itself conducts autonomous military operations in international waters, like how they took down those Somali pirates by themselves last year, where there were Indian commandos parachuting into the oil tanker and taking over this ship that had been hijacked by Somalian pirates and all that. India doesn't ask for the permission of other countries to perform something like this on the high seas.
Was it on a special economic zone or a...
No, it was in proper international waters. See, but then we need to then be willing to challenge it, saying, no, those are not international waters. That's our economic zone, and therefore...
Was it near Sri Lanka?
This operation was near Somalia, near the Gulf of Aden. But the point is that India did not ask anybody for permission. And Russia does not ask anybody for permission. France does
It's not legally required even in
It's not.
international
I
water.
mean, that's why we call it the high seas. That's why we call it into the the international zone, international waters. The whole idea is that it belongs to nobody. So, and that's the message that the Americans were trying to send the Iranians as well. Right? See, the other thing is, the other reason why the Americans don't see this as being a very big deal for now is because it's just a damn frigate. So if maybe we could just give me 60 seconds to just quickly go through the categories. So there's aircraft carriers, ultimate show of power and power projection in the entire world. There are only like, I think 200, 250 of them all over the world. These are essentially mini cities with thousands of people traveling on the water. Then there are the amphibious assault. There's that class. Slightly smaller than the aircraft carrier, but its main job is still to transport rather than to attack. So though if either of those are attacked by an enemy country, that is a huge deal. Because these are the proper billion-dollar assets.
US Marines,
Yeah.
they kind of have their own career type, not the big career types, but they have the, they launch F-35Bs from that. They used to do Harriers.
Yeah.
So they are not as big as the Nimitz class or the latest.
No. That would be the amphibious attack vehicle class, which is
the second type.
Yeah, smaller than aircraft carrier, but still much bigger than a warship. And its job is to carry stuff rather than to fire things. So if those two are attacked, that's a major deal for a country's navy. Those are major high value assets in a war. Then you have what are called the cruisers and the destroyers. These are the proper warships, heavily armored, heavily firepower oriented, the ones that you would expect to rain down fire on an enemy in an actual naval operation. So these are the cruisers and the destroyers.
And they fire what?
They fire, so you have different sizes of cannons, you have land-to-air missiles, you have torpedoes, they have all kinds. Their job is to just go into war locked and loaded with weapons, and they are the ones in the front line who will be facing other enemy attack ships. Then you have the frigates and the corvettes. They are much more geared towards movement, flexibility, swift operations and things like that. They are not this huge naval asset to the point that the Americans will now be like, oh my God, there's a frigate hiding in Sri Lanka. Let's go. Now, if there was an aircraft carrier in our port during a US-Iran war, the situation and the attention would be very different. But with a frigate and all that, there's a very tiny part of any country's navy. I think Iran, if I'm not mistaken, they had something like 150 warships or something. So the frigates, the destroyers and the cruisers would typically be what we call warships. So they have about 150 of them estimated. Who knows how many they have remaining at this point. So it's not something that the Americans are likely to jeopardize global relations over unless we do something dumb. In which case there will be a reaction to that rather than to this being some huge Iranian asset which they need to take
What kind
over.
of weapons does a frigate have?
A frigate, so they're saying that this particular frigate that was taken down was unarmed. The Iranian government claims that it was simply there for the Visakhapatnam review and that it was completely unarmed. I'm not too sure how verifiable that statement is. But I do know that the Visakhapatnam review was over by the 21st of February, right?
So they were there for a long time.
Yeah, so these guys were. So I think it was. It ended on the 28th of February. It started on the 25th and it ended on the 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So these guys had already left
So by the time they left Visakhapatnam, the war hasn't started.
Yeah, it hadn't started.
So India didn't know that.
Yeah, what I've heard is that as the exercises were ending, they got news that they had to return for some special emergency.
From Iranian side.
Yeah, if the Iranian side recalled them. So then these guys left. And as they were leaving, we don't know what the delay was. We do know there was some kind of delay because that ended on the 28th of February, while this happened on, I think, the 3rd of March or 3rd or 4th of March.
Fourth morning.
Yeah, 4th morning, right? So they were dilly-dallying for a while there, probably because they knew that there was an attempt like this, that they were potentially being hunted. And they kind of, that's precisely what ended up happening, unfortunately for those guys. Yeah.
So what is this talk of that shape? The distress call was given earlier and we didn't respond for 11 hours?
There are claims like that. And I mean, look, once again, this is not a decision that any government can just take like that. This is not a government or a country that can afford to just be gung-ho like that. When there's a war going on and when one active side of that war is asking you for your active help, particularly when we are facing a situation we've never faced before. See, it's not like this is a commonplace thing. This is some very, very unforeseen, unexpected, unprecedented thing. So yes, I wouldn't be surprised if our government took some time to consult the Navy, to consult lawyers, to consult India, to consult the United States, and to speak with Iran as well, where to consult the ruling party, for the Prime Minister to consult his advisors. All of this takes time, especially if it's an unprecedented situation. So even if there was a delay, if this delay was over something which is commonplace, then I would certainly be critical of it as well. But there's a very unprecedented situation, right? So I would much rather... See, I'm very critical of many things, but when somebody is being flexible and strategic during a time of crisis, I would much rather just give them the benefit of the doubt until they do something dumb. So if this government does do something dumb in the course of handling all this, I will be one of the first critics. But I've not seen them doing anything outright stupid so far in terms of this.
So why Trincomalee?
I mean, Trincomalee is a natural harbor. It's just easier to have these assets there instead of having them closer to Colombo. So it's also, it's much better. Not that we are expecting the Americans to attack or whatever, but the fact that it's a natural port also means that it's a safer port in general. So, I mean, and once again, who knows what logistical constraints there were, right? So, for example, maybe there's something there in Trincomalee with the ships available and the officers available where they can handle this. And getting it to
the Colombo port also means that the insurance claims to the other ships, insurance premium for the other ships that are coming there, commercial vessels even goes higher.
Yeah. I mean, the real villains in this entire war have been the insurance companies. It's not Iran or China or the United States that has closed down the Strait of Hormuz. It's the insurance companies. They are the ones who are now like, nope, we're not going to lose any money on this. We're going to cite some old European law that was used back during the Suez Canal crisis or whatever, and we're just going to refuse to give you any kind of practical premium rates.
Have they done it?
Yeah, they've already done it. So the reason why the Strait of Hormuz is completely crippled at the moment, yeah, you can blame Iran for it, you can blame the United States for it, but the large reason for that traffic just dying out is the insurance companies.
But Iran says that if something goes through this particular, 100 kilometer pass, we will attack.
Yeah, so the Iranian Navy says that, then the Iranian foreign minister says, no, we never really meant that. So even from Iran...
So it's uncertainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty, which is why it's the insurance companies who are pricing it into their premiums and preventing ships from using that channel rather than the shipping companies or the nations themselves.
But Trump says that Iran Navy is mostly gone by now.
Yeah.
So do they have vessels to attack?
You can always get these small RPGs, these sea-based mines and all that to harass traffic. You might not be able to control the inflow and outflow of traffic completely, but you can still harass traffic. And then once again, you have these insurance companies who can always be depended on to jump in and quadruple the problem into something much bigger than it is and turning it into a unfeasible proposition to begin with.
Okay. Given the India's position,
Yeah.
we haven't seen anything, as you said, from their government, any statement. Okay, I saw one where they kind of asked for the help of, they kind of got permission from US to get oil from Russia.
Okay, let me explain. Let me explain that, right? Because there's a lot of stuff floating around. Now, India has not really stopped buying crude oil from Russia. What they've done over the last few months because of US tariff pressure is those oil tankers come to Oman, and then for whatever reason, those oil tankers then leave back to Russia empty. So you can imagine where that oil is going.
Oh.
Precisely the amount of oil that India used to buy from Russia and that has now been blocked by the tariffs is disappearing from oil tankers docked in Oman.
So there's either the tankers change or there's a pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a black market transaction where instead of doing it near your country, you now do it in Oman. Oman and India, as far as oil economics go, is right next to each other anyway, so they don't really care. So that hasn't been stopped. See, the thing is, if Sri Lanka says tomorrow, we will allow India to celebrate their Independence Day on the 15th of October, that's quite meaningless. India is going to celebrate it regardless of whether we give them permission or not. Similarly, the so-called waiver from Washington, it doesn't really do anything. All it does is just move the transaction from Oman closer.
While we are recording this video, we have just found out that there's a third Iranian ship docked in India.
To India, so that, Reliance Industries and all that now have slightly quicker access to the oil. But the quantity that was being transferred, barrels in versus barrels out, from Russia to India was almost the same. Now, maybe we should just tell your audience why all this is important, right? Why is this? Because there's something known as the petrodollar. Now, the petrodollar is obviously the system where you can only buy Middle Eastern energy in dollars. So what happened after World War I and World War II, small history lesson for our audience, is almost every country went bankrupt and the United States emerged as the primary industrial powerhouse of the world. So a whole bunch of countries got together in 1944 in a place called Bretton Woods. And you have what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement is what shaped the modern financial system, where it was decided that all countries in the world will trade in dollars. So it's basically in the 1400s, you start off with the Portuguese dollar being the Portuguese currency, global reserve currency. You move to the Dutch, you move to the British. In 1944, it officially becomes the US dollar, which is the world's reserve currency. And the value is pegged to gold. So that's the Bretton Woods Agreement. In 1971, you have what was called the Nixon shock, where President Nixon essentially said, oh, sorry, we're not going to peg this to gold anymore. We are going to call this what's called a fiat currency, as in a currency that's simply pegged to the government. And we are now going to be in complete control of the dollar, not gold. So they took the dollar away from the gold standard.
Became a speculative and you can print anything.
Exactly, it became a fiat currency. Now, when a lot of countries protested, Nixon basically played another masterstroke, which is Nixon and Kissinger basically went to all these Arab nations and they said, look guys, we will give you permanent military protection, all you monarchies and all that. You don't have to worry about revolts and terrorists and blah, 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 Iran, Israel. You don't have to worry about any of those guys. We will protect you no matter what happens. But you have to make sure that all of this oil is sold in dollars.
When was this?
This is in 1974.
So at that time, Shah was ruling Iran.
Yeah.
So that's kind of American-friendly guy, Shah is considered. So why didn't the Iranians take the deal?
And this is actually one of the reasons why there was a split. So until this happens, Iran is Washington's closest friend in the Middle East. Whenever you say ask who is Washington's ally in the Middle East, the easy, clear-cut answer is Iran. Not even Israel at this point. Because in 1956, the Americans kind of prevented England and France from helping Israel by invading the Suez Canal, by invading Egypt.
Whoa.
Where it was the Americans who basically made the British and the French withdraw.
Why?
Because they basically said this was not in American interests. They wanted it to be under Egypt's control, and they were not happy with these European powers still acting like they were superpowers. So the Americans were like...
Because Americans helped out them in the World War II.
And they were not global powers. England and France were not global powers who could actually go into Egypt and all that and take control and just think they could get away with it. And this was the Americans essentially going, go back. And they had to go back. So essentially, it's after 1974, when the petrodollar comes in, that the Arab world becomes closer and closer with the Americans. And then you start seeing the Persians.
But Iran could have taken the same deal, no?
No, but see, the thing is, Iran could have taken the same deal, but Iran did not have an oil explosion the way that the Arabs did. Where with the Arabs in the 70s, they were transforming from basic desert societies poorer than Sri Lanka into these trillion-dollar economies in the space of a very short period of time. So what the Americans knew was, you don't want the dollar? I've removed the dollar from the gold standard, so you don't really want the dollar? Guess what? If you want to buy oil, you need the dollar. So now everybody had to go back begging for dollars. When Nixon...
Why did they remove it from the gold standard in the first place?
Okay, number one, because they had to spend a lot of money for the Vietnam War. So basically,
they couldn't find the gold for them.
They can't find the gold for them. And gold is a limited asset. That's the whole point of pegging a currency to gold, that you can't just do whatever you want with it. But with the Vietnam War, the United States had to start doing whatever they wanted with their currency. And this made a lot of people start asking for gold back. They were like, here, take your dollars, give me back the gold. In fact, I think in 71, the British... they took back something like 3 billion tons of, many tons of gold. I can't remember what the number is. And this created a major, maybe 300 tons of gold or something, I can't remember. But this created a huge crisis. So Nixon was like, oh, really? So you don't
I'm going to peg it to something else.
Yeah, so I'm going to peg it to something else. What is that something else? Me. I'm going to decide what the dollar is worth. I'm going to decide how much you guys can have. I have a printer. I don't need your gold. I'm just going to print money. And when people said, no, in that case, we don't want dollars, then in that case, if you guys are just going to play God like this with currency, we don't want your dollars. So then Nixon goes to the Saudis and he's like, say yes to this deal. And
because everybody wants oil.
Yeah, everybody wants your oil. So let's say, hey, guess what? If you want that oil, you need the dollars. So then
in return, we will provide you security.
Yeah, in return, permanent security.
If you say no, we will create a regional conflict to persuade you to know that you need security from us.
Yeah, but at that time, there was no question of the Arabs saying no. It was such a good deal.
Because they want to develop themselves.
Yeah, they want to develop. They've started. Imagine you suddenly find gold in your house.
Oil in your house.
Yeah, it could be oil, it could be gold, it could be anything. You find some new resource in your house that you know the entire world wants, and people are ready to kill you even to get that. And the most powerful force in the world comes to you and says, don't worry, I'll make sure you're rich. I'll make sure all of this is protected.
I'll be your buyer.
I don't even need to be your buyer. Just sell it in my currency. That's all I need. See, it's not like they were putting any coercive thing on the Arabs where the Arabs were now going to lose anything.
A deal that is too good to be true.
A deal that's too good to be true. And to this day, that deal is what has been dictating Middle Eastern politics. That deal that the Americans will never abandon the Arabs. See, superpowers abandon their allies like this all the time. This happens very, very commonly. But when you're a critical energy supplier, then you can't really afford to abandon your allies. Maybe 15 or 20 years from now, when the United States has no use for all these guys.
Oh, the oil,
maybe-
what happens when the oil runs out?
yeah, when the oil runs out, but we are a long way away from that, right? So once again, I think I told you this before.
Yes.
The International Energy Agency has been saying since 2007 that oil is going to run out and that demand for oil is going to drop. And they said it's going to happen in like 10 years or something. Then by 2015, they were like, oh no, you know what? It's not going to happen in 10 years. It's going to happen in 15 years. And in 2022, they had another revised number. Now in 2024, the IEA basically came out saying, sorry, we were wrong. Oil is not going anywhere.
Because we find new deposits also.
We're finding new deposits and we're finding that people are not interested in switching to other sources. So will the International Energy Agency ever be made accountable for tricking the world into believing that oil was running out and creating this new $1 billion renewable energy sector that no Western country benefits from? It's a Chinese monopoly, right? Will any of the people who say oil is bad, you're going to run out of oil and all that, are they now willing to retract their positions? Because almost every industry report was based on the IEA model that oil was going to run out. If you look at all these renewable energy startups that ask for billions of dollars in investment from governments and all that, they always quote the 2007 IEA figure that the world was going to run out of oil soon. So what are we going to do now? But
isn't it good to have many sources of energy, alternative sources of energy?
See, it's good to have many alternative sources of energy, but it's also a question of whether people can afford them. There's no point in telling Somalia that they need to build wind farms and solar panels if that is going to keep Somalia in poverty. That's the problem, right? And there's no point in building a wind turbine to save the world if the components required to build that wind turbine devastate the environment, which is the other problem. So, see, renewable energy is good, but the problem is renewable energy something for the rich, or is it going to be a mass technology? Now, for renewable energy to be successful, you need it to be a mass technology. We need people all over the world to start using solar panels, hydro energy, wind energy, blah, blah, blah. And now this is the other contradiction. On the one hand, climate change activists and environmental activists say that there's going to be a lot of climate volatility in the future. There's going to be a lot of climate instability in the future. But on the other hand, they also want us to use renewable energy, which is completely dependent on stable climate. See, if you have a bunch of wind farms and you get heavy winds only 2 months out of the year, then how is that feasible? So on the one hand, they are telling us that climate is going to be very, very disruptive, volatile, unpredictable.
They have a contradictory argument.
Yeah, it's a completely contradictory argument. On the one hand, you say there's going to be a lot of climate volatility. On the other hand, you say, hey, please buy all this technology which is dependent on stable climate. So if you're going to say that wind is going to be volatile, that water shortages are going to come up, that solar covers are going to be volatile, then what's the point in promoting wind turbines and solar panels? That's the other problem. If we were to just look at cost benefit in terms of producing power, nuclear power is by far the most efficient. But this is kind of like the psychological impact argument that we were making earlier when we spoke about India and China and the USA and all that, right? Even though aligning with those countries would be strategically good for us, there's going to be a psychological impact on the people, and it's going to create all kinds of complications because of the emotions that are involved. So similarly, even though nuclear energy is without a doubt the most efficient form of energy, are Sri Lankans really ready to have a nuclear plant in our island here? Will any political party be able to push that agenda? Will you and I be able to push that agenda? The answer is no, because there's going to be a
What about an underwater one?
No, even if it's an underwater one, the knee-jerk reaction is going to be, we don't want anything nuclear anywhere around us. And they keep going to Chernobyl and all that. So this is the other irony, right? If we were to statistically...
Which is a highly improbable event.
Yeah, that's the point. It's a highly It's like how some people don't want to fly on planes during 9/11 because 9/11 happened. But when you try to explain to them that the chances of something like this happening on September 11th one more time is just astronomical, they still don't want to listen. It's a psychological thing. So similarly,
You are in a more risk when you're driving on the road.
exactly, you're far more at risk when you're driving on the road than you are up on the plane. But once again, even us who know this, if we are on a plane and turbulence happens, I mean, I'm not too worried until the air hostess and all that start buckling in. Until then, I'm kind of okay. I'm like, yeah, these people are still moving around. But when the cabin crew start putting on the seat belts and all that, that's when I get a bit nervous. So what I mean is, even though statistically many arguments can be made, I don't think we as a country are ready for nuclear energy psychologically or emotionally. No.
But we could connect to a power grid as we discussed on the last podcast.
Yes.
And then buy power generated through nuclear technology to our country.
Yeah, but the problem is very few countries in our neighborhood we are not the only ones who lack the maturity to have a statistical, objective energy conversation. This could be India, this could be Pakistan, this could be Bangladesh.
Same mentality, no?
Same mentality, same challenges in creating nuclear energy. So people just don't like that word, and they just have a lot of horror stories associated
But
with
it's, to counter your argument about the renewable and the green energy argument. So isn't China successful in that? So they have proved that this can be done.
So this can be done with great government subsidies. See, look at EVs, for example. Why is it that Chinese electronic vehicles completely dominate the market while European and Western
Because it's
electronic
cheap.
vehicle? Why is it cheap? Because China gives giant subsidies. None of these electronic vehicle companies operate at a profit. They're all given giant subsidies by the Chinese government,
Including BYD?
all of them, which Western governments do not. Western governments can't afford to do that. So Chinese EVs, it's kind of like what they've done in many other industries. You subsidize your local manufacturers where they are producing it at such a cheap rate that everyone else goes out of business. And you use that the point of EVs, and there's recently a professor from Fudan University in Shanghai, right? So Chinese energy specialist, who himself was saying, the whole electronic vehicle thing, that is a geopolitical, symbolic initiative by China to show the rest of the world that we are the giants in renewable energy, that we can also produce cars that are sold and driven all over the world. But this entire industry is possible only because of massive, massive subsidies from the Chinese government. If those subsidies are pulled out, all those guys would start going bankrupt.
At the expense of Chinese taxpayers, you mean?
Yeah, at the expense of Chinese taxpayers. Yeah. But this is how China works. They identify industries that will give them strategic value, and they spend a lot of money. This is what they did with what we discussed a few days ago, critical mineral refining, where they've been doing this for a long, long time. There's absolutely no way that the Europeans or the Americans or the Canadians will ever be able to catch up with the Chinese, because in order to refine critical minerals, you need to destroy your own environment. And these guys will never get the environmental clearances to do that. I mean, just drilling for oil itself took so many years for mainstream American politics to accept the whole fracking concept and the whole drilling concept. And even that is like a, double-edged sword for them. They've still not even managed to maneuver through that fully. So they will never be able to...
Chinese doesn't care. They just do
Yeah,
it.
the Chinese don't really care. They look at long-term strategy. They know that they have a complete grip over the world because of this refining critical mineral monopoly, near monopoly that they have. They are willing to pay any price for it.
So what is the long game for them? How are they going to make the return on investment?
The return on investment is that almost everything that's made in this room probably requires some mineral that was refined
No, I mean
in
the
China.
EV market I'm talking about.
No, the EV market, I don't see, unless there's some revolution in the technology, it will have to remain subsidized. But China is more than happy to subsidize it, because if 50%, let's say, of Canada, I'm just throwing out an argument, if 50% of Canada uses electronic vehicles, even if those vehicles were sold at a massive loss, the Chinese government still makes a lot of money because Chinese companies are part of that food chain. And China has the monopoly in creating many of those, minerals and components that they have. So even though the car company makes a massive loss, the Chinese are like, here's a check. Just keep doing what you're doing. Because we make more money overall by boosting this energy transition. So Trump wants to stop the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Xi Jinping wants to boost the transition. That's the basic thing. And there's a final weakness in the fossil fuel industry that a lot of people don't know, which is that you can't just call them oil. You can't just call it crude oil. There's heavy crude oil and there's light crude oil. The United States traditionally, because it bought oil from Mexico and Venezuela, the Gulf of Mexico countries, not all, about 70% of their refining capacity is for heavy oil. But the oil that's been unlocked by the shale revolution, which has made the Americans the largest net exporter of oil, those are light. That's light crude oil. So the Americans can't use most of the oil that they drill. What they do is they sell it to the rest of the world, like Europe, for example, and using that profit, they then buy other types of oil. So it'll take maybe 10 to 15 years for the American refining industry to become 100% suited for the type of oil that is being extracted from the United States itself. Most of the basins in the United States produce light oil, which is good if you want to replace Middle Eastern oil, which is good if you want to kind of take over the market and just become the largest oil giant in the world, which is what they always wanted. Like, if I can sell $100 billion of oil to the rest of the world, I don't mind spending $2 billion out of that to get oil from somewhere else for my own car and house and all that. So they buy a lot from Canada, from Mexico and stuff like that, which have these heavier crude oil kind of types, which you can refine in the United States.
But they're building refineries for the softer one as well, right?
Yeah. So this transition will take about 10 years to happen.
So once that happens, the Middle
Once
East,
that happens, they are just...
what happens to the countries in the Middle East that they have the security agreement with?
Yeah, but see, the thing is, but the countries in the Middle East are important. They will still remain important because they will still sell whatever it is that they are selling in dollars. They will still make sure that that entire rich segment of the world is still subservient to the American strategic umbrella. Even if Saudi Arabia goes, you have WWE events in Saudi Arabia now, you have UFC events in Saudi Arabia now. I think they're trying to host the FIFA World Cup or whatever. Saudi Arabia is now transitioning very heavily into kind of the luxury tourism, media, many media like films, high budget films. They have their audio launches and release launches in Dubai and places like that. So even then, if they transition into that kind of luxury service economy, they would still be firmly within the US strategic umbrella. And that will always work out for the US. I mean, Dubai is the second home of the world's super rich at this point. I mean, if you're a rich person in the world, you need to have a second house in Dubai. I mean, come on, all your friends would laugh at you if you don't have at least a second or a third house in Dubai. It's just become a normal thing with the world's ultra elite now. It's like the largest real estate.
So that's why they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
So, and that's why Iran has really messed up in some ways by attacking many of these different hubs as well. Because now the message that you've clearly sent to the world's rich is your second home will never be safe unless you take us out. See, on one hand, Iran has succeeded in making many of these Arab countries question, hey, why are we even involved in all this? It's to make ordinary people living in Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, blah, 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 to ask, why are we caught in this? It's because of these American bases, right? Why do we need these American bases? That's the question. Iranians want everyday Muslims to ask themselves.
Oh, hey, we don't have army. We need the bases.
Yeah, we have lots of tech, but unfortunately, do we have the expertise to run that tech and defend our own borders and
And
stuff
who's
like
to
that?
say that Americans did not put a backdoor in all of these weapon operating systems?
Yeah, and who's to say that the Americans won't just say, nah, I'm not going. Like, if you ask me to leave now and I say, no, I'm not going, you need to now take a decision, right? Is it going to be a physical confrontation where you try to throw me out? Or do you just say, okay, get lost and just sit there and go about with your job? But the Americans are not going to leave just because the Arabs asked them to leave. There's too much at stake here. There's the dollar at stake here. So that's not going to happen either. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for Iran. On the one hand, they've succeeded in their objective of making these people suspicious of their own partnership with the Western world. But on the other hand, it's also sent a very clear message that the current Iranian government will not allow the world to exist in peace, and that whenever something like this happens, they will lash out. See, the Middle East is the transit point of the world for human transport. Right? I mean, look at commercial airlines, for example. They've made themselves the tourist hub of the world. They've made themselves the real estate hub of the world. Whatever you could call important for the world's rich elite, the Middle East has really worked over the last 15 to 20 years to cater all of those needs. So will the rich now say, hey, in that case, I'm going to throw my hat into this as well and do what I can to get rid of this Iranian regime because I want my second home to be safe? That's possible too.
Okay. Where does Epstein fit in all this?
See, the thing is, I'm sure that the whole Epstein files thing fits into this in some form. Maybe some people see it as a distraction. Maybe some people don't. Like I was telling you the other day, from a purely Israeli and American political point of view, it was Trump's opponents and Netanyahu's opponents who were really being put through the cauldron for the Epstein files. So I personally, maybe there was a role, but I don't think it's as big a role as a lot of these people think. Look, why is it that the Epstein files are so fascinating to people around the world? Why is it that this is not just an American phenomenon? This has become something that alternate media platforms in every country, including Sri Lanka, like channels like yours, why is it that we're also fascinated with the Epstein files? Well, it's because the Epstein files confirm what many of us knew in some form or the other, which is that there are lots of rich people in the world whose names will never appear on any newspaper, whose faces will never appear on any television channel, but who have the political power to wine and dine almost anybody they want, and who have the power to make entire governments support them if they want. Now, different people have called this the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the shape-shifting aliens, the New World Order, whatever. Throughout history, there have been many conspiracies about secret societies. Some of these societies, like the Freemasons and all that, are not even that secret anymore. Right? I know people like, you can pay money to become a Freemason.
There's a membership club here even.
Yeah, even here, right? So, but the point is that throughout history, those who pay attention to the world have always known at some fundamental level that the people you read about on the news are not necessarily all the people who control world events. And the Epstein files kinds of puts a proper framework to it. And you also have a weird suspicion that these people must be up to all kinds of sick shit because they have the money to get away with it. That is also a logical assumption. So when something like this happens, many people see it as a vindication, as a justification of their paranoia, all these, because typically when people talk about Illuminati, the New World Order, reptiles are the ones, Dick Cheney is a shape-shifting alien, George Bush is a shape-shifting lizard, whatever. You have all these conspiracy theories and they're dismissed as conspiracy theories, and some of these deserve to be dismissed. But the whole secret society thing, as I was saying, it touches on a very, very logical nerve for many people who logically observe the world. Like, how many people in the the Conservative Party high level panel that decides who the British Prime Minister should be if the Conservatives win? Do any of us know any of their names? These banking families that own and run many of the largest banks in the world for many, many generations now. Do any of us know their names or what they look like? People say, oh, the Rothschild family. My point is, look, if the Rothschild family really was as powerful as you claim it to be, you and I would have never heard of them. The fact, the actual Rothschild families are the families whose name doesn't appear in any newspaper or television program or whatever. So where do the Epstein files fit into all of this? Maybe they are a distraction, but I would see them as a much larger signal that a lot of things people suspected about the world ended up being right, which is why we are so fascinated by it.
So I'm sure that you guys are thirsty for more. And there are a lot of things we can learn from Nilanthan, and the things we have been seeing in the world, he just put a very logical argument and connected them all together that brings out the clarity in world events that has been happening for the last 50 to 80 years, maybe even to World War II. So coming back, I would like to know from you, what would our strategy be? Especially, you have sent me an article in the morning saying that the necessity for us to have a deep sea kind of a security strategy.
Yes.
To protect the deep sea around us.
Yes.
Especially in terms of submarine warfare that is coming up right now. This was written 6 years ago by your mentor.
Yeah, this was written about 8 years, almost a decade ago by my mentor, Dr. Harinder Vidanage. And you know him well at all our events and all that as well. And the point that he was making is that there's a whole new domain here that will become very, very critical, which not just Sri Lanka, but many countries have not paid that much attention to.
So I don't want to go into that today. So that's another podcast that you guys have to join for the next one.
Excellent.
But I will ask one more question from you.
Yeah.
Why can't we have a defense satellite or rent out a defense satellite just to monitor what happens around us?
Because we would need a defense policy for that.
We don't have one?
No, when was the last time you saw a document? There was a defense policy that was done, which was tabled to the cabinet, but it was never really released to the public.
When was this?
Maybe about a few years ago, in somewhere between I think during the good governance regime, if I'm not mistaken. But other than that, we've never really had a proper piece of paper that listed out what our defense priorities are, which is then open to the public so that the public knows what our defense priorities are. No? So every country releases like a defense review or a joint military doctrine or something like that. We are currently working on that. In fact, my mentor Harinder Vidanage, him and his team at the Kothalavala Defense University are involved in discussions on how we can come out with a proper defense policy. With consultation from all the different stakeholders, the tri-forces, police, blah, 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 so that we can have a comprehensive defense policy. But we've not done it over many, many decades.
Do we need a defense satellite?
I think we do. I think anything that gives us information in the defense space, more so than for larger countries, it's even more invaluable for us. It's even more invaluable for us because data, information, surveillance, reconnaissance, these are the things that are going to save us if World War III comes. Not how many torpedoes we have, how many missiles we have, how many warships we have. That's not, for a small country like us, coercive weapons are not going to win the day. Data and information is what's going to help us survive.
And strategy.
Yeah. So anything in that direction, I certainly will approve of.
So should we launch our own satellite or should we buy time sharing access to a regional defense satellite?
So I think a time sharing agreement would be a lot more economically viable. At the same time, it has to be something where some local Sri Lankan partner is given a boost from it. See, the problem is, now you and I both know this. We have a lot of young, talented, eager, young, scientists here. but we don't have an indigenous weapons industry that we can actually start touting. So our first step is to build that. So to any of you young people who are listening, who are entrepreneurs, who want to be tech entrepreneurs and all that, my main appeal to you is to help in some way create an indigenous weapons industry. This does not have to be something that rivals India's or China's or whatever. Look at where we can fit into that supply chain. If India's making the gun, let's try to make the bullet. I mean, that's a very simplified, simplistic analogy because India makes tons of bullets. India is kind of the ammunition supplier to the rest of the world. But what I mean is, find ways where we can plug into that. Look at all this anti-drone stuff that's now going to be needed. We're going to need, look at what Ukraine did, look at what the Iranians did. They say necessity is the mother of invention, right? Maybe it's because we've not really had the necessity here. Whereas in Ukraine and Iran, they did. But to all the young people listening who want to take Sri Lanka's tech space to the next level, please look at the weapons industry and warfare in general, even if you don't like it on a personal, moral level. This is something that can really help the Sri Lankan economy in the future.
Indeed. But what about the funding? Things like this requires funding. It's not like you come up with an app to hire a taxi.
Yeah. See, but the thing is, if you have innovative designs and if you come up with something new, it's actually quite easy to get funding. You can showcase a prototype. You can showcase even a design. There are lots of weapons expos happening all over the world. There are lots of venture capitalists all over the world looking to invest in the next big technology. Raising capital is hard only if you say, oh, we have nothing, but give us money so that we can have something.
You can't, yes.
Yeah. But if you're some, enterprising young scientist or innovator or engineer, if you have an idea that is feasible and original, then you can get funding. There are many places to get funding. I mean, or contact one of us and we will hook you up with people who have that kind of, who have those resources, provided your idea, your design, your prototype.
You need to come up with an MVP?
Yeah, come with something, right? Come with something that we can then pitch. But the problem here is that it never gets to that something stage.
Especially in the defense industry, because that is an area that hasn't been looked into and focused
Even though we are the actual pioneers who taught the world on either side, on the terrorist side and the counter-terrorist side, the people who taught the world how to wage war, modern war with low cost and innovative weapons are the LTTE and the Sri Lankan military. But we don't.
We knew how to make sea drones.
Yeah, and this is what I mean by necessity is the mother of invention. We did it when it was necessary, but we are not doing it now that we have an option. So that has to change.
So that's an invite for you guys to come up with a military startup. That's a new concept. I mean, we were talking about it, but didn't see it in that angle. So thank you, Nilanthan, for bringing that out. Yeah, we have a lot of ingenuity within ourselves. So we have seen it during the war, as he said.
If I could just add a small thing. So remember, it's not the finished product itself that many of these rich investors are looking for. They're just looking for a workable, interesting idea. Even if they then have to license it to some other company and you just collect a paycheck, they're fine with that, right? Just find some small way to screw this in a little easier than the existing thing. Then you don't have to produce this entire speaker and the stand. You just license the screwing technology to a company that is already making millions of these speakers. And you collect, $1 for every $50 it's sold, whatever it is. So it doesn't even need to be something that we create these big companies over. It can just be a licensing play. So always remember that if you're an innovator.
Cheap, trace around. Even a cheap trace around would do.
Anything that reduces cost will make you money. So just find a way to save people, to save armies, navies, and air forces money, and you're going to be rich.
And to make killing easier if you're morally up to it.
Yeah. But look, the making a killing and killing people are two different things. So I invite you to make a killing and not to actually kill. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in our next podcast. Subscribe the channel and send this to all around your friends. We are mostly doing single podcast, but we are making an exception for Nilanthan and few others who are coming up with excellent ideas and excellent perspectives. Take care, Nilanthan.
Yeah, and if you want a Tamil podcast, I would be more than happy to contribute as well, right? For those who complain that this is too much of an English podcast and all that, just remember, I mean, if you're willing to sit through a Tamil podcast, I'm more than happy to do this in Tamil.
You need to find a new host for that as well. Then.
I mean, it's okay. I can do sign language for you.